second reading in this new worship series that we are in comes from the 11th chapter of the book of Isaiah, the first 5 verses. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. May God's blessing continue to flow through and dwell within the experiences of Scripture on this day. May it guide the meditations of our hearts and the words of my lips. I told Leslie that we could use some images of some broken down phone boxes since we're doing God's calling. And she said, "Oh, is it going to be one of those series?" I said, "Well, we'll see where the Spirit leads us." Because that first reading is a hard reading. It happened to be the reading that I was led to use for my senior sermon in seminary. I got some reactions from the faculty. Because that first reading is one of judgment. It is one of prophetic condemnation that fell upon the people. And this first part of the book of Isaiah is filled with images of judgment, of prophetic words against the leaders of the land and the people that inhabit it. It also has words of hope built in. Isaiah is speaking to, in the first part of the book, speaking to the people of the land of Judah, the kingdom of Judah. He's a court prophet. He's a spiritual advisor to the king, one of many. This is his profession, this is his job, this is his calling and his vocation. And he is one of a small handful that speaks a truth to the king. He's one of a small handful that says that the people have strayed off the path. O king, you have strayed off the path. And this does not lead us to good things. Now, what will end up happening eventually is that the Assyrian kingdom, the northern tribes of Israel, will be run over by the Assyrians, and the 10 tribes of the kingdom of Israel will be wiped from the face of the earth. They will exist in diaspora, but they will cease to be a people in the traditional ancient understanding of things. Now, this text has been used throughout history, and it is relevant throughout history. Numerous points just in Israel's history. This first reading that we had, this 5th chapter, this vineyard text could be used. And it's been employed by clergy throughout the life of the church. It's not a happy image. When God planted the people in the land, when God raised up leaders, when God carved out a sacred space, God had expectations. Justice and righteousness are the two that come up in this wonderful word play. Mishpat and Tzedakah. That's mispronounced, by the way. Justice and righteousness, and yet mishpat, if we make it mishpak, one letter difference, it goes from justice to bloodshed. And Sedekah, if it becomes Se'aka, one letter difference, it goes from righteousness to a cry. The prophet is saying that we are so close and yet so far. God hoped for justice, but behold, bloodshed. God expected iniquity, but behold, iniquity. The words that the prophet uses in this image from the 5th chapter talk about a legal system, but not like we understand legal systems today. This is not about justice in the sense of going to court. This is justice in the sense of social entitlement, justice that is due to the poor, as the book of Exodus puts it. It is fulfilling one's obligations to others. We might say doing right by somebody. When God planted the vineyard, God said, I expect justice for those who are most easily taken advantage of. I expect that we are going to be looking after the poor, the widow, and the child. That's the image that comes up over and over and over again throughout Scripture. Those who are shunted aside or forgotten or easily dehumanized. Scripture will use terms like alien in the land, a people without a state. God says, I expected people to do right by others, especially those that are vulnerable. And yet, what I found was wild grapes. And so in that 5th chapter, God says that I will be removing the hedge of protection. I will be allowing the things of the outside world to do what they do. I will allow the choices of the people to work their way out. We might be forgiven, but the ramifications of our choices work their way out. They ripple. God says, I'm going to do that. And that is, again, a text that is set in a specific place and time, and yet it is one that keeps coming through over and over again. But when God is calling, as we're in this new worship series, it's going to carry us all the way through Christmas, we think of God calling and we start thinking about the work of Christ. We start thinking about Advent. The radios are already playing Christmas music. The stuff's been up in the stores since Valentine's Day, so... And so we are reminded, as a people who are post-resurrection, we are reminded of that second text. Now again, it is a text that is grounded in the history of the people Israel. Isaiah, the prophet, is saying that the hedge is going to be removed and the vineyard is going to be trampled. However, from the stump, a shoot's going to come up. Now, I've cut down more than enough trees in my lifetime, enough shrubs, that by golly, that shoot comes up whether you want it or not. So God has said. And in the moment, what they were expecting was a Davidic king. In that moment, what they were looking for was a human king who would come along, who would be wise and understanding, who would enact through their power and authority that God has given them. God expected the king who would lead the people in justice and righteousness. In the moment, they were expecting a king, a leader. And we, as a post-resurrection people, we identify a king, a leader. We point to that one and we say, here is one who is wise and understanding, who is powerful and effective, who is able to judge for the benefit of the poor, one who is obedient even to God, one who will eliminate predatory violence. If we were to read the Isaiah text further, we would find that the shoot that comes from the stump will have the lion lay down with the lamb. So we, as post-resurrection people, talk about one who will eliminate predatory violence, who went to the cross refusing to enact retribution. The ancient people in Isaiah's time were looking for a Davidic king. We claim that there is a king who sits upon the throne already, who is capable of doing these things. But when we make it only about the king, when we forget that the Isaiah text says the people, when we make it only about the king and we ignore the calling of God to be a people of Christ, when we make it only about the king and we neglect our baptismal promises that we have made, we make it about the king and we forget the blessing of communion that is given to the people for the people. It is as if we look at the stump and we say, surely that sprout cannot grow. Surely the ministry cannot grow here. If we make it only about the king, then we forget our role in this process, not just as people who have sinned and fallen short, but as people who are called by God to excel, to rise up, to be a people for justice and righteousness, to get those little letter differences correct. So God is calling. God is calling not just for a king. God is calling not through a single prophet to rise up a single leader who is going to lead us if we would just follow. No, God is calling a people. Not just to prepare, mind you. Advent is the season of preparation. We're heading that way. We're going to be there real soon. And by golly, it comes in on December 1st. Advent calendars will line up exactly. Kids around the world will be excited. But God is calling not just to the king, not just to the leader, not just to the prophet, but to the people. Is calling not just for us to be preparing, but to actually be in the ways of God. Justice and righteousness. Doing right by others. And this creation that we have been gifted to be stewards of. We are being called to sprout from whatever stump might exist in our lives as individuals and as a community of faith. We are being called to grow. To be church today. God is calling. Thanks be to God. And amen.